Today I'm speaking with Dawne Anthony. Dawne, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello.
And just to clarify, Dawn's name ends with an E, just like Anne of Green Gables, and ends with an E.
Oh,
So
yes.
we'll get that correct. And just for a quick bio, Dawn is originally from Ohio. She moved around the country a few times, but eventually landed back in Ohio, where we're speaking with her today. She graduated from Toccoa Falls College in Georgia with a Bachelor of Science in Vocal Performance, and she was a flute minor. So that's really cool. And she has been a vocalist for several symphony choruses and an opera chorus. She regularly performs in various venues, including benefit recitals to raise money for victims of domestic abuse, which is awesome. She's married and she is the mom of 9 kids. Wow. I thought four was a romper room. 9 kids. I'm sure we're gonna hear more about that soon. But that's what I know about you so far, Dawn. Could you tell us more about yourself and maybe some of your hobbies?
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot about me, but I love one of the biggest things besides music, which is my life, but nature is a huge thing for me. And so as much as I can be, I'm outside and I am an amateur birder. So I'm looking for birds all the time and we have bird feeders all over the place. But yeah, I do a lot of hiking and love that. And I love spending time with my kids. And I love singing and I love listening to music. And yeah, that's a lot of what I do.
And I'm
So,
going to save this question for later, but I saw that some of your work you actually do sing in churches still, and I was thinking just as a side note, I think I'd find myself if I was doing that, that'd be triggering. But we'll get to that part of the story. I'll ask you that when we get there.
yes.
Well, anyway, we're here, of course, to hear your story. We'd love to just invite people to we love to get to know people, but we love to hear where you're coming from. And one of the biggest things for me that helps me understand people's stories is just to take us all the way back. So if you could tell us, in childhood, how you got exposed to Christianity and where the story went from there.
Okay. Well, I was raised in the 70s and the 80s. And so during my very young years, that was the time of the Jesus movement. And both of my parents were Christians then. My father he wasn't raised as a Christian, although his grandmother took him to church. So he was baptized at 15, didn't have any idea what he was doing. My mom had a very religious mother. So she was exposed to church a lot. And so they together were Christians after they got married and got very involved in the Jesus movement. So they had us kids in church a lot. So Sundays, special Bible study, prayer meetings, and all the other things in between. So went to a lot of churches. Uh, I wouldn't say we were church hoppers, but my dad, there'd be something that would bother him, either a theological question or a problem that he would have with how the church was conducting things, or it could have just been something simply, this church isn't offering enough for all of us and for our children, so we would leave. But the one thing I remember was not so much when I was very young, but as I got older, if we left a church and we were still in Christianity, but if we left a church, then we hardly ever talked to those people anymore. So to me, it felt like, okay, here's the next club and the next club. We do have
Hmm,
some friends through the years that we kept, but it was just something that I noticed as I got older. So,
that is
but
interesting.
Christianity was a very big deal to me. I vaguely remember sitting by my mom and accepting Jesus in my heart. I think I was about 5. But then there were so many times that I didn't know if that would stick. And so I remember thinking, I need to ask Jesus in my heart again. And I was always asking, praying the prayer or asking for forgiveness. And even though I was told, once you've accepted, the Lord is forgiving all your sins, but I still felt an immense guilt every time I would sin.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I had a lot of guilt through the years. And some of that might have been from my parents, but most of it was what I got from church and what I read in the Bible. And so I felt so much condemnation a lot. And so I
Hmm.
prayed a lot for God to forgive me.
Did you
So,
feel like you were in danger of losing your salvation?
yes and no. Sometimes I felt, well, no, I can't lose my salvation because we were in Baptist churches sometimes, but then we would go to a different church and they'd say, "Oh, be careful. You don't want to step too far that way or you're going to fall into sin and you're not going to be able to come back. You'll fall away." So I heard both messages as I grew up. So, and
Hmm.
my parents, I would say, they were very strict. Um, like the 80s music, I simply don't think they liked it. I think that's what it was, but
Right.
also they put a little moral spin on it too, because I wouldn't have been allowed to listen to Def Leppard and uh, well, even Huey Lewis and Chicago wasn't even seen as okay. So I would either sneak those things or I would listen to them and then have to hear from them about how, well, that's not really music or the message is immoral. And even myself, I wouldn't allow myself, as much as I love those songs, oh, I don't want to upset Jesus. So yeah,
Hmm.
it was kind of a combination between them saying no, oh yeah, and the youth groups and the summer camps that would say all those things were bad. And then of course myself. So
Did you get that connected a lot with the idea of being too worldly?
very,
Yeah.
yeah. So we had of course I was raised with classical music, so I had a love for that from the time I was young, but then a lot of Christian music, a lot of the 70s Christian, like second chapter of Acts and Keith Green. And then as we got into the 80s, then we had other bands and well, Michael W. Smith and Amy Grant and all of that. So that was okay. So, except when Amy Grant started to sing songs that wasn't outwardly Christian, then people were upset about that too. So,
I
it
remember
just
those.
a lot of mixed messages. So I just wanted to enjoy music and
Yeah, I
yeah.
remember when she came out with those. That I remember those discussions in churches about, is this appropriate to use your gifts for something other than direct worship? And it's amazing the issues of the day back then that were just like, they're obviously completely irrelevant now and beyond silly. But when,
Yes.
just for to go back one step, when you were placing your faith in Christ for the first time, what did they
Mhm.
explain to you was actually like happening? Like what was the issue and what was Jesus doing to resolve it?
I was taught, and this was again a combination of my parents and then church, that I was a sinner. I was born into sin. And the only way to be in God's favor was to accept his gift of salvation, which meant Jesus died on the cross for my sins and canceled that debt and was raised again. Of course, they had to put that in there because I always heard, well, if he hadn't risen from the dead, then all of it was for naught. So,
Right.
so yeah, I knew the whole story, and then I started reading as I learned how to read. I read more and more, and I had my little New Testament with the Psalms and the Proverbs in it, and then I had the whole Old Testament too eventually. And so I read, but there was a lot of things I skipped in the Old Testament because they bothered me. And I had a lot of questions. I mean, from the very beginning, Genesis 1, I had trouble with the fact that things just appeared, even though I was told, well, that's God. He can do anything. But that didn't make sense. But the big thing that didn't make sense was if God knew Adam and Eve were going to eat from the fruit of the tree he said not to, then why did he put it in the garden? And that used to bother me a lot. And even the serpent, he said, you won't surely die, which that made sense because they didn't die that day. But then, of course, we had the whole rationalization of, oh, well, that means spiritual death. Like, okay, whatever. So, and the commandments, the first couple commandments really bothered me. I am a jealous God, only serve me. And I thought, wait a minute, we're not allowed to be jealous, but you can. Or we're not allowed to kill people, but God can have nations down to the women and children slaughtered. Noah's flood, he knew people were going to do what they were going to do, and yet he regretted that he made us. Wow. So I felt kind of worthless a lot. Besides, I mentioned being having self condemnation, but seeing that God just in an instant, which could just strike me dead, was really bothersome to me.
Hmm.
So,
I've got to just say you were definitely a step ahead of me at my point in that journey. I'm sure I asked some questions, but the fact that you had the bravery just say, wait a second, this doesn't sound right, or just, I need to figure this out. That was like, it didn't become a part of my journey to ask those questions until my 40s for the most part. So kudos to you for
Well, I maybe I should stop you there. I was very careful who I said that around. So
right.
I
I'm
would
sure.
mention those things to my parents, only because they had those questions too, especially my dad. My dad, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I really think he was the key to me being able to question and eventually get out, which took a long time, but I always had him in the back of my mind. And
Hmm.
so yeah, I shared those doubts with them and those questions, but I dare not say that at church, and even if I uttered it out loud, say I was talking to God, I would feel bad, and I would constantly ask for forgiveness that I would even doubt.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, I
yeah.
definitely want to make sure we get back to that part of the story when it's at that stage, because that sounds interesting. So when you were growing up, what was like your private devotional life like, and what was church worship like when you were, in it and truly believing?
Okay. Well, I would say personally, I spent a lot of time on my own, uh, reading the Bible. I would sing songs to myself. I would pray. I would, at different times, have a prayer journal and write things, although a lot of my journals were just Dear Diary. But then I felt bad about that. So I changed it to Dear Lord and made it a prayer. But yeah, I went to church as much as possible. And it was super, super important to me. I was definitely what they would say in love with Jesus. And that's what I wanted. I had gone through different stages of my life. As kids, you think of all the things you want to be when you grow up. And I would say from the very beginning, I wanted to sing. My dad had me on stage at the age of 4. But then I kind
Wow.
of went in circles and was interested in geology and birds and nature. And then I thought, well, no, I better get back to music. Well, then, and this is very young, but I was about 7 years old, and my mother's twin sister lived in LA, and they were in the involved with the Church on the Way, which was Jack Hayford, and they took us to, I think it's called Evangel's Temple or something like that. But anyway, we visited and learned about the lady that founded the Foursquare Gospel Church. She was an evangelist, a preacher, and I was so impressed by that. So there was a time I thought, well, if she, a woman, could be a preacher, maybe I could be. And so I would set up my little stuffed animals, or there'd be little like kitty cats or whatever around, and I would preach and have all these notes in my Bible. And so I did that for a while. And then I
That's
got
awesome.
away with from that and back to music. So, but
That's
yeah,
so
I was
different though,
very
because a
impressed.
lot of churches would have squashed that mentality. That's awesome that
Oh
you
yeah,
got to do
that
it.
came later. Oh yeah, that was definitely preached in the pulpit later on in some of the other churches that women should not even speak in church. So yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
Hmm.
So but yeah, it was very important to me. I went to public school and I tried to be a good Christian. I don't think I was one of those kids that was overly in people's faces trying to witness to them. I just wanted to be a good kid, but a lot of people knew what my witness was and how I felt about things. So I still have a friend, in fact, we still talk, that he would say things just to see if he could upset me, and then he'd pull back and he'd say, well, no, I don't want to bother you, so I'll just leave you at that. But he'd say things like, can God make a rock bigger than himself? And that would fluster me so much, because I'm like, God could do anything, I don't want to talk about it. And it would upset me, but then he was my friend, and that was how it was. So
That's funny.
but
I used to love
yeah,
those questions too. That's
yeah.
really funny. So as you're a teenager and you're really, diving into the whole theology, you're just getting grounded in what you believe and you're getting more connected, I assume, in church. When you look at the more personal side of it, did you feel like you could actually sense God, like either talking to you through his word or talking to you directly, doing miracles? opening doors, metaphorically answering, should I go to this school, that school, date this boy, that boy? Did you feel like there was any sense of him leading where you could kind of look back at it and say, I've really sensed God's presence, like his spirit was really clearly evident in my life, in my heart?
I'd say yes and no. Uh, I had a different view of prayer than what I was hearing about in church. So I really didn't believe in the miracles that much, the everyday miracles around me, praying for cancer to go away, or uh, it could be anything. I had a problem with that. And again, I go back to my dad. He had problems with that. So that was kind of an influence on my prayers. And yet I still would pray and I would still ask for direction. And sometimes I felt like, yeah, God is impressing that on me so I make a better decision. And then, of course, I also thought, well, I'm part of that decision too. So, yeah, I felt like he was speaking to me, and yet other times, no. And I mentioned at the beginning, I love nature, so I could be outside. And at that time, I would attribute what I was feeling to God. And music, raising your hands in church, that depending on what church we were in at the time, of course, because not all churches would do that. But I felt moved with music. And well, then there was a time I hate to go back, but eighth grade, I would I had this falling away time. That's what the church would call it. And I started to rebel. I didn't like the fact that my parents didn't like the 80s music, and I loved it. And I loved Wham. That was like the end all, and loved George Michael. And so anyway, that whole year, I was really getting further away, and my best friend and I both were like that. She and I were just so irritated and frustrated with the rules and church, so we fell away that year. And then, of course, that summer we went back to church camp, and I felt convicted and I felt so bad. And so I came back to Jesus. What did we call that? Rededication. So I rededicated my life, came back. I had the record back in those days of Wham, and I broke it in two because I felt so bad that I liked them. Like, yeah, but you do silly things. So anyway, so ninth grade on and then into high school, I got more and more serious about my faith. And I would say about my junior year in high school, I was really impressed with some missionaries that came to the church. And at that time, we were going to a church that was the Christian and Missionary Alliance denomination. And so
Okay.
their whole thing is missions. And so I felt this might be what I need to do. I didn't want to give up singing, but I thought, well, I should use my voice for God. And so I looked into things and realized that there was actually three different colleges I was looking at that were all Christian Missionary Alliance colleges. And I chose one that was in a warmer climate. So I don't know if that was God or that was just me not wanting to go to the snow and ice. um, but yeah, I ended up there because there was a major in what they called missiology or missions. And so that's what I set out to do. I had taken like 5 years of Spanish in school, and I was so excited because I wanted to go to South America and witness and sing. I actually had visions of me being on stage, not to give myself glory, but to sing about Jesus to thousands of people. And that's what I wanted to do.
Mm.
So I get to college, my first semester, and without going into too many details, the first semester I saw so much hypocrisy. I had come out of a public school situation, so I was excited. I'm finally at a Christian college. All the professors pray before every class. We worship all the time. I thought it was going to be great. And some of it was, but there was a lot of hypocrisy, and I hated it. And but I kept going because I kept thinking, well, they're not perfect, and God can still use this place. And besides, the church back home was helping fund college a little bit, not a whole lot, but they gave me a scholarship because I said I wanted to go into missions. So I had to stay, right? But still, I thought, no, music is still, I felt like that's really what I should major on or major in. And so I, at the time, had a roommate, Puerto Rican, love her. We still talk. But her now husband said, okay, Dawn, we're going to pray about it. We're going to fast on such and such a day about you switching your major. So I didn't like fasting because food's very important to me, but I thought, okay, I'll do it. So we fasted all day, and by the end, I felt a peace about changing my major. And that may sound like such a minuscule thing, but I was scared to death to do it because I thought, oh, what's the church back home going to think? You know, but I kept feeling like I had to keep telling people, I'm still going to maybe go, or maybe I'm going to minister in the US, but I'm still going to be in ministry. I'm just going to major in voice or whatever. And so I ended up going through college. I finished, had a lot of hiccups on the way, which we can get to if you want to ask questions. But anyway, that's how I ended up still majoring in music. And still, with all those questions I had and the things I saw around me at a Christian campus that really bothered me, I still hung in there because the alternative was what? Maybe hell. You know,
Hmm.
if I really didn't believe this stuff anymore, what was going to happen to me? So I had to keep going.
Yeah,
So
no pressure, right? Well, just curious
yeah,
as a quick side note, what was dating like at Bible college?
those were the hiccups.
Okay.
Second year in school, I met a guy, and again, we're friends now, which is really cool. But I met this guy who sang, fantastic voice. We would sing duets together and all that. But things got, they went too fast, too soon. And I had this idea that when you date, it's for marriage. And uh, going back to high school, that was the same thing. My mom would tell me, "You be very careful who you date because that could be your future husband," or "You need to be careful so you stay pure." That was high school, and so I heard that. And I also heard things like keep your focus on your schoolwork. So dating was not exactly encouraged, not forbidden, but not encouraged. So I did date someone in high school for a very short time, which I know you asked me about college, but back in high school, I dated someone and I was devastated because he ended up dumping me like the day before Valentine's, which is awful. He told me I talk about God too much. And that really sent me through the roof. And fast forward decades from that point, he's now a pastor.
Was it a good experience though to hear you're so passionate about God, like your love for him is intense? Was it a good thing at that time in a sense?
Well, I guess, but I was still devastated that he would say that to me. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I kept being on fire for God at that point, but I still was really hurt. So I would say that that set the pace to me not dating anymore until I got to college, even though I was interested in people, especially one in particular that you'll hear about later. But I didn't date, and then I met this guy my second year in college, and like I said, things were moving too fast, and I felt like I was falling into sin, and I felt terrible. I was further away from God again because now this new relationship was taking the place of Jesus. And so the next year, he didn't return, which was good, probably. It gave me a chance to kind of look at my life and see what I needed to do and step back and, I didn't know if I wanted to continue the relationship long distance or not. But then I went to Florida. I spent a weekend with a pastor that I had known. This pastor was my pastor in Canton, Ohio, where I was growing up. And he had taken this big Alliance Church in Florida. So I was spending the weekend with him and his family. Well, in comes a young man that was a sailor. He's in the Navy. And I guess he was friends with their one daughter. And we ended up spending the whole weekend playing tennis, sailing, doing all this stuff. And, nothing happened. I just thought, wow, this guy's really cool. And maybe the guy that I had been dating isn't the end all. Because, I thought if I don't marry him or if I don't continue, maybe I'll never find anyone again. Well, here's somebody that took an interest in me, and he was very flattering, and he knew exactly what to say. And so we got involved from that time on. We started writing letters, and I had broken up with the boyfriend that hadn't returned to college that year. And it was a long distance relationship for 2 years. And I saw him on short visits, but I didn't really know him. And so I graduate from college, and a few months later, I marry this guy. Bad idea, but I didn't know. Yeah.
Was he a Christian as far as you knew?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I would say he wasn't quite as devoted as I was. I was a very on fire person for God, and even with all my hiccups during college, I had always turned my life back around, I thought. And um, so I thought of the two. Of course, it wasn't a contest, but I remember thinking, yeah, I'm a little more devoted than he is, but he's in the Navy. Maybe he'll turn around. And
Yeah.
so we married, and he was still in the Navy when we married. So there was a lot of time that he was not there. And so I didn't know him before we got married, and I really didn't know him after. So, he would show me the things that were nice, but I didn't see everything. So,
Hmm. What happened
yeah.
next? What happened next with the marriage?
I'm sorry. Can you do that again?
Sure. So it sounds like his that became part of the initial part of your deconstruction, the breakdown of the marriage. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say that, but it really wasn't until my first child was born, and
Okay.
he was home. So he came home from a 6-month tour. I became pregnant with my first child, and when she was born, all of a sudden I saw red flags. Now, I had seen red flags before, but I just ignored them, thinking that Jesus would make it all better. But when my oldest was born, there were just little things. I could tell that I was no longer making him number one because I had this new baby to take care of, and it took a toll on me. It was a very hard birth and really hard adjustment trying to figure out how to take care of her as my first child. And he would say things, especially this one day I remember I woke up and he said to me, I feel like I just have a roommate. I don't have a wife anymore. And this was 6 weeks after having this child, and I'm still healing. Uh, I didn't know at the time, but I had postpartum depression. I didn't know about those things in those days. And it was devastating to hear it. But I thought, well, I'm married and now I have this kid with him. We got to make it work. And so I still had my doubts, and I did a lot of praying. And then we started having more and more kids. And by this time, we had moved back to Ohio. So we were closer to my parents, and his parents were about 3 hours away. So we were closer to them too. Didn't see them as much, but I just kept seeing little things. And then we found ourselves, we had gone to a couple different churches, and then we found ourselves in a situation where I was going to have kids and no birth control. And at first I thought, well, that's a good idea. I wanted to be natural. I didn't want to be ingesting anything that wasn't good for me. But the kids kept coming and I was exhausted. So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but it was really rough.
Yeah, I can imagine. At what point um did you get to the point where you felt like it was like the marriage was unfixable, where you just
Huh.
there's no like counseling or anything wouldn't help. It's just this is a dead marriage.
Well, I started feeling like I wanted out after my third child, and then a few things happened to where I was talking to different people, and I thought, well, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't leave him. I had nowhere to go anyway, and I had three children. I didn't want to lose them, and my degree was not a degree that would lead to a lot of financial support. So I would say after my third child, I was having issues, but then I repented and we did go. Uh, we went to a pastor and talked with him and his wife for a while. And then we went through, I believe it was a Gary Smalley book. I cannot remember the name of it, but it was all about trying to learn each other's love languages and heal our marriage.
Yeah.
And so we did that, and we ended up in another church, and we moved to the country, something I wanted to do because my oldest really wanted to have animals, and I was thinking of getting the kids into 4-H and things like that. And our family was growing. By that time, we had 4 kids, and I was pregnant again. And we found ourselves in a church that uh, definitely confirmed that you shouldn't use birth control, and the more children, the more blessings. And if you didn't want that, then you were telling God you didn't want his blessings. So I heard that all the time. uh, by my seventh child, when I found out I was pregnant with her, I was very depressed. And I thought, oh boy, what am I going to do? And again, I mentioned it to him. I don't even remember if I used the word depression, but I just said, I can't keep doing this. And he's like, oh, God will provide. You know, he always does. We'll have what we need. So, again, another part to just I had so many doubts, and I saw that God wasn't really coming through for me. And I what I didn't mention is we did fight. We had a lot of disagreements into the wee hours of the night, and then, we'd cry and repent and do all those things, but it always seemed to be that I was the one that had to try harder. And I mean, I remember looking at diaries years later of me writing all the things that he was saying to me and the things that hurt me, but I would always say, but I need to be a better wife. And so I kept going. And of course I was homeschooling too, something I wanted to do. I had heard of it years before, so I really wanted to homeschool, but the more kids that came, the more tired I got, and I realized that I couldn't keep it up. I would not be able to teach the higher math, the higher sciences, keep everybody straight, all the lesson plans, keep a house, cook the meals, plan the meals, help with the animals. And my oldest daughter took on a lot of things. The farm animals really were her thing, and so she did that. But she ended up being another mom. She helped raise those kids. She helped potty train. She would hold a child while I was busy with another one. She cooked meals, and so I saw what was happening and I didn't like it, but again, didn't know what to do. So, going to my last child, my ninth one. Oh, and I did leave out, I had 3 miscarriages too, one of
Mm.
which almost killed me. And so I was scared to death. I had a midwife for the last 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So my last 5 kids were home births, and I love the midwife. She was great, but she even told me after my 5th child, "You've got to stop. Your body can't handle it." But I kept going because he wouldn't listen to that kind of advice. And, God was going to provide, he was going to take care of me. Depression, that's not a thing. Pray it away. Don't go to counseling, nothing. So I had all that. Well, once my ninth was born, I started noticing even more things, and he had gotten worse. The ex had really been, well, he's a narcissist, which I didn't know that word back then, But I started noticing more and more things, that everything was all about him. And uh, and yeah, my relationship with God was really suffering by that time, because I saw that God wasn't making the marriage any better. He wasn't changing this person who supposedly had the blood of Jesus on him because he was a Christian. He wasn't changing. He was getting worse. And I wasn't getting any help. And so
Oh,
my last child, she was not quite a year old, and I had a symphony chorus performance in Columbus, and I had invited an old friend who happens to be my husband now, and I won't get too far ahead, but we were really good friends in high school, and we had been talking on Facebook for years. Nothing questionable, just always, checking up on me. I would check up on him. And I said, "Hey, you got to come and hear us sing." We were doing Mendelssohn's Elijah. That's what we were performing. And I had a bit of a solo part, which was really exciting. And so he came to that concert. And I remember looking up in the balcony as we filed back onto the stage at intermission. And I went, "Oh no, there's Rich." And still intermission was going on, but I saw him mosey on over to the ex and talk to him for a while. I thought, oh boy. And I was already very, shall I say, out of love with the husband by this time. But I saw Rich and I thought, oh, yes, I remember how much I liked him back in high school. In fact, he was the one that I was very interested in high school, but we were always just very good friends. So at that moment, I thought, oh, those feelings are coming back, but I got to keep those under wraps. I'm married. So from that time on, we started talking more. And he had, what I didn't know, he saw Facebook posts of mine from years before, and he was very concerned about me. But throughout that summer, we started talking, and I was by that time pretty much done with I was done with the marriage, didn't know what I was going to do. Again, here now I have 9 children and still no way to support myself. And I didn't know how to even obtain a lawyer. I don't know how you do those things. But through the course of the summer, talking with him, talking with my parents, and another really good friend of mine from church days who had come out of religion by then said, "Hey, we've got this big house. If you and the kids can get out, then our house is open to you while things are being settled." And so I had a huge support system. But yeah, I would say by the end of the summer, I was really working through not only getting rid of an ex spouse who was awful to me, because I felt all the things I didn't say. I was all the abuses, emotional, mental, psychological, uh, I guess you could say spiritual, and sexual, because it was always expected that I put out no matter how I felt, no matter what was going on around me. And really, I didn't have bruises. He wasn't hitting me yet, but I saw a lot of anger. And with all the things that I was dealing with, that was taking its toll on me physically anyway. So by the end of the summer, I had decided I'm leaving. And by that fall, I had a lawyer and we had a plan. And we don't have to go into the whole escape thing, but it was pretty something. And so through all that, I would say I was slowly coming out of religion at the same time. So,
hmm. When you were going through this, how did you feel about like when you talked to God about like, God, where are you and all this? Did you feel like he was just completely absent, or did you feel like he was working behind the scenes to somehow, make this a good thing, even though it was so painful?
yeah, at first that summer, I was feeling bad. And I remember still talking to God and trying to figure out what to do. But then I don't really know. It was kind of little by little, I realized he's not even there. He's not answering my prayers. He's not changing anything. And I kept thinking, well, in my heart, I know what I'm doing is right. So if that's God, then so be it. But I wouldn't even think it was God that was impressing those things on my heart at the time. I really felt the God of the Bible, the God that I brought up learning about, would have never been okay with me leaving a husband. And so it was kind of in between. He wasn't okay with what I was doing, or he wasn't even there. And then eventually, I would say by that fall, he wasn't there, definitely in my mind. So,
Mm. Yeah, you were raising your kids to believe in all this stuff the whole time, right?
oh, yeah, big time. Oh, yeah, Bible. I read the Bible to them every day. There was a psalm, a proverb a day, Old Testament, New Testament passage. We had character studies. We had, oh, our science books were, was it Apologia or something like that? I can't remember. Life packs. That's one of the things we did. We were in Answers in Genesis and went to the Creation Museum and all those things. But even that, I was teaching all those things, and yet as we got further to me leaving religion, I got further and further away from doing that and wouldn't even talk about it anymore. Um, there was a few things that happened after my last child was born that well, I met Ken Ham from Answers in Genesis. It was the day I met him, shook his hand. I didn't like him at all. I thought there is something wrong with this guy. Very egotistical, very rude. So I kept that up here. There was also another ministry slash business, which we all know ministries are businesses, but the Vision Forum. I don't know if you're familiar with Doug Phillips.
Oh yeah.
He came to our homeschool convention that year, and I was so excited because we all thought, all of us homeschoolers thought, oh, he's great. We would never say he was God, but we lifted him up pretty high. I met him and had the same vibe and thought, what is this? I couldn't figure out what it was, but I didn't like what I felt. And a few months later, it came out that he had cheated on his wife with a young intern in the ministry. And little by little, all these things were happening, and I plugged those back away in my brain too. And so, yeah, with the children, yes, I was raising them to love Jesus. But as I got out of it, I wasn't pushing it anymore. In fact, my fourth child, who is now 18, he told me the other day, he said, Mom, when we left the house for that short time when the divorce was occurring, he said, I really, it never was real to me, Christianity. But at that moment, I'm like, oh, so this is what we're doing now. Good. And he was so happy that mom wasn't pushing those things anymore. And it seemed like, as hard of a situation as it was for the kids to go through a divorce, it was also a relief that they didn't have two parents trying to cram those things down their throats. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Amazing, amazing journey. As you went through all that, you mentioned that in that time frame, you just said it just that I don't think there's a God here. How painful was it for you to admit that to yourself in terms of like wanting to go to heaven, maybe, or even just the basic father figure? Like I just like knowing that there's someone watching out for me, God and his guardian angels. Someone's looking, has a plan for my life, and it's for good and not for evil and all that kind of stuff. How hard was it for you to finally get through that final gate to say this isn't real? Like, did that hurt like crazy, or were you kind of deconstructing so slowly that by the time you got there, it's like I'm done. This is irrelevant.
Yeah, I would say at the beginning it did hurt and there was a lot of confusion because all those things that were ingrained in my mind, as I realized these things are not true, or there's just a lot of problems with those things, that was my whole foundation. That was my whole identity. I mean, everybody knew Dawn loved Jesus from high school through college, and all the people I met after marriage and all those things. Everyone knew. And so that was hard to come to grips with the fact that not only is my identity for myself, it's crumbling. I don't have this father figure like God, uh, but also I was scared to death of what other people would think. And I still do struggle with that, but I don't want to get too far ahead with that. But it was really hard at first. But then I realized too that God was never a tangible thing to me. And you know who was tangible? My dad. My dad was there. And the funny thing is he got out of Christianity a few years before I did. And he would never push that on me, but he would always, we would have these long talks, either on the phone or when I would go visit him, very long talks. And he would challenge my faith and do the hard questions. And a lot of the questions that I had as a very little kid, he would ask those again. And he was just there. He was there listening to me. And, my parents, neither one of them could really help a whole lot as far as me getting out of the marriage, but they were there. And when the divorce was final, my dad was so happy because their
Mm,
daughter was happy again. Yeah. So,
mm.
and in fact, they said that my whole countenance had changed once it was all over. So,
Yeah, I believe it. It's amazing what a good spouse can do to benefit and bless your heart, and what a bad spouse can do to just break you down. It's an amazing,
yeah,
amazing part of life,
yeah.
either way. When you did get out, this is maybe a good time to ask the question of, what was it like to begin to be vocal? Did you feel like you could be vocal about escaping Christianity, or did you feel like it was just something you had to kind of keep quiet for a couple of years while you restarted your life, as it were, on so many levels? And what were some of the
Yeah.
initial conversations like with people? I mean, I know your dad was obviously happy to talk about it, but when you talked to Christians about it, how did
Hmm.
they respond? Like, were you shunned?
Yeah, well, there was a lot of Christians I just wouldn't even bring the subject up with. In fact, the Christians that I knew in the churches that I went to with the ex wouldn't have anything to do with me anymore. I met with one friend one time for lunch after the divorce, and I had the feeling that she never wanted to talk to me again. She wasn't unkind, but very, I don't know how to say it. She wasn't really demeaning, but just I knew that I was not in her favor anymore. And it was a very uncomfortable time. And I thought, okay, if you can't accept me for who I am, and I was very guarded how I shared, but she didn't even like the fact that I left an abusive husband. She thought I should have stayed. So,
Wow.
so friends like that, those were gone. My best friend from the time I was in fifth grade, and this is the girl, we went through everything together. We went to church together, school for several years, baptized together. We were in each other's weddings. We were at each other's, the births of our children, all those things. Something happened when I started to uh, get away from the marriage right before I got my lawyer and all that. I didn't talk to her as much because I didn't feel like I was going to be accepted by her for what I was doing. And that was just the marriage part. And so once uh, I started to see her again about a year later, she and I would have talks, and I would, again, very guarded conversations. She kind of knew where I was at. She knew I was very upset with the church and all that, but I never came out and said, hey, I'm an atheist. I didn't say it. I didn't want to hurt her because I really cared about her. But then that following summer, I married Rich. And I had decided not to have a lot of people there because we were actually very scared to tell the kids. We didn't want it to get back to the ex. We didn't want him to show up. And so it was just my children, a couple very close friends of Rich's. My parents couldn't be there. My dad was really couldn't go anywhere that far. And I didn't have my siblings. I had nobody, just my immediate family. And I was going to tell my best friend about it, She knew we were probably going to get married, but I didn't even tell her the date because I wasn't going to invite her. Not because I hated her, I just didn't want anybody else there. Well, I was going to tell her, and one of my kids had an Instagram account and was so excited the day after the wedding that she put it on her Instagram account, and my best friend saw it before I got to tell her. And she was so upset by that. And she was already upset that I never told her where the kids and I were hiding the year before and all those things. And honestly, our friendship dissolved at that point, and I had not even told her I was an atheist. And so I still haven't. And we've had a couple letters back and forth since those times, but I think we're done. And
Mm.
I do have another couple of friends that are definitely Christians that were very helpful during the divorce because they knew the ex, knew what he had been doing and who he was. And so they were very supportive. And yet, even with them, they know that I'm out, but I've never said I'm an atheist. So honestly, I don't think I have come out to other Christians as an atheist. I belong to an atheist group. We talk all the time. I do these podcasts. I've got a lot of friends that are not religious at all. One of my best friends never had an ounce of religion in his life, and then of course I've got my husband. But just until now, I realized I don't think I've ever come out to Christians as an atheist, and we live
Mm.
in a very red state, a very red county, and a very red town. And so people are crazy about Republicans and right wing ideology and Trump and Christianity. I mean, there's a church everywhere around here. And so I'm very careful what I say because,
So
my kids go to the public school here now, and most of those teachers are Christians. And I don't want to go in there like gangbusters. Well, I'm an atheist, you know.
so Christians haven't
So
really had a chance to try to win you back because they don't necessarily know you're gone. But do you do you think that when, if and when it ever becomes more public, that at least on their radar, that they'll try to have that conversation and say, you were clearly hurt by the church. There was some misunderstanding. You got your theology wrong. But if you'd been under the right pastor or the right ministry in a different church,
yeah.
you would have stayed because you would have known this isn't God hurting you. This is just people, but God is still God and the Bible's still the Bible. Do you think they're going to go after you with those kind of messages and try to win you back or at least share the basic gospel with you?
Well, when you said that, that reminded me I had a few Facebook friends that we had gone to high school together, and they had seen how my Facebook posts have changed because I do put a lot of atheist type things up. I mean, not a blatant thing, but a lot of things I say on there is a signal to those folks that, hey, she's not who she used to be. So I have had some private messages through the years from them, and I've been able to just say, no, the whole thing is toxic. It's not just I had a toxic husband. It's not just that the church hurt me. The whole message is toxic. And I've been able to say that with some people. And then there's others that, I care about them and I don't think they'll receive it very well. So if they say they'll pray for me, I just say thank you. Or one friend says, well, you're always going to be God's child. And I'm like, whatever. And I just let it go because sometimes I don't care about keeping certain relationships. And so, sure, I'll come right out and say things. But a lot of times I care about those certain people. So
Hmm.
I don't say all the things that I'd really like to say. And you did say earlier that I perform in churches. Yeah, I'm actually employed at an Anglican church. And, it's money. And if they were to say you cannot be at this church unless you give us a statement of faith or you give your testimony, I would be out because I in good conscience I couldn't do that. I won't lie to those people, but they never ask where I'm at in my faith or my walk, and there's some really good people there. And there's a 92-year-old man from Ireland that's there, and he can't wait for us to be there and sing. And so, I'm giving people joy by singing and getting a paycheck, and I love singing. So That's why I'm there. And honestly, like the recitals that I give, churches, a lot of these churches have the best venue for an event like that. And so the one church where I did a recital, or I've done two recitals now, they have given me that space for free because it's a benefit concert. So you
That's
can't
awesome.
beat that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
interesting just to go on a couple steps back how you described your marriage falling apart and just the abusiveness that was there, the narcissism. It almost was like time-wise, you were deconstructing your marriage and the horrific treatment you were being given by your, as it were, the person who was you were supposed to be submissive to, your leader, as it were, of the home. And you were in parallel deconstructing this person to whom you're supposed to be ultimately submissive, who is the leader of not just your home, but of your whole life in the universe. And you're kind of realizing that this guy is a narcissist, but he's not really he's there physically, but he's not there in terms of like, is he present as a loving, caring, sensitive, supportive husband? And he's like, no, he's not really there in that sense. He's there in like a narcissistic sense, but he's not really there in a loving, kind way. He's not my friend. He doesn't care about
Right.
me. And you're kind of saying God's not really there either. And all the ways you think, well, he's caring for me, he's doing this. It's like, actually, I'm caring for myself. And the things that are working out because I'm making wise decisions. And it's like they're a little bit different. And I'm stretching the metaphors a little bit, but it's like they're both narcissists in terms of the character.
Yeah.
They're both, psychologically abusive to you, and they're both not really present in terms of like a true presence of the relationship of love or even an existence at all. When you look back at that, do you feel like it was ironic timing, or do you feel like there was like if you what I mean is this, and I say this because I've asked myself these kind of questions. Do you think if it had been the chips had fallen differently, where you had had just the most loving, tender Christian husband, where if you said, not tonight, sweetie, I don't really want to come together, um, he'd say, oh, no problem. It's, I'll respect your body and your autonomy, your sexuality. And you said, I need your love and affection. I need to, we need to communicate better. And he did. And he showed up and he was a very good leader in the sense that he wasn't overbearing and he was, a servant leader, as we used to talk about in church, but he really did put you first. Do you think your deconstruction would have occurred, or do you think it took something that radical in real life for you to undo the stuff in your imaginary life?
I think I would have still deconstructed somewhat, but maybe not to the degree of completely being done. I think, not sure how to say this. I think I would have been a lot more accepting of certain things. Like I would have been more open to public school earlier. And I think if I would have maybe just slightly deconstructed, I would have been more of the kind of Christian that the fundamentalists will say, well, you just go to a liberal church. Like my uh, chorus director, he had just retired last year. He's gay. And I remember having a real burden for him, thinking, oh, he's not really a Christian. But then as I got to know him more and as I went through life and of course was deconstructing slowly, I realized, here's a man that really he still believes in God, loves God, goes to a church that affirms him and accepts him for who he is. And so I may have become one of those kind of Christians. I would have been more accepting. I don't know if I would have given it up totally. And yet, at the same time, I'm a lot like my dad, where it's all or nothing. So I either throw myself completely into something or I'm done completely. So I may have held on to some remnants of it, but I think I would have still deconstructed, just it wouldn't have looked like it does today. Yeah.
Yeah. In some ways, I
So,
wonder if some of the horrific things that we do go through, especially at the hands of supposed Christians, really can, though, expedite the process where, like, I know for
oh, yeah.
me, I have people in my life, even and this wasn't per se part of my deconstruction, but just reflecting backwards and, the long-term story. I remember thinking about people who I knew were very exposed to Christian messages for their whole life, where they were literally listening
Yeah.
to hours of Christian radio a day. Like if when
Yeah.
they got up, they'd have a preacher on while they're eating breakfast, and they might go out to work. But if they live close enough to home, they'd come home for lunch, and they'd have a preacher on, and they'd have a preacher on at dinner time over dinner, and they'd listen to some more maybe, and you'd be like, you listen to preachers and the gospel for hours and hours and hours a week, and then you're in church, of course, and Wednesday night prayer meeting, like the Bible's just through your system, and you're the most grumpy, selfish, nasty person that I've ever met. And I'm just like, this doesn't make sense. And I think, and of course, when you add in the people that are not just kind of passive aggressive or just not that nice, but that are aggressively directly abusing people, that we come across, we see them and think there's no way that the Spirit of God is in you. But if you are exposed to the gospel so much, then the question has to be begged, where is the power of the gospel? The gospel is supposed to
Right.
transform lives, and it's not transforming anything. Therefore,
Right.
either you're a faker and you're a pretender, which I know Christians would probably default to, oh, that person wasn't really a Christian. If they were a Christian, they'd be loving. Or the eventual question that came up in my mind is, maybe the gospel doesn't have the power that we think it does. And the occasional story you get of, oh, this guy was a nasty drunk and then he got saved and then he turned into a wonderful person. That was just him pulling himself together. It wasn't God. He
Right.
just said, enough, I've been a jerk and it's time to wake up and do right by my family. But that wasn't God. That was him doing it. And so therefore, if it's just him doing it and it wasn't the gospel, and then the other guy that's just always a jerk and the gospel never made a difference, there's no real power here. And that
Right.
asking that question very seriously helped me a lot. And I think sometimes it does, when you look back at it, you think, I don't know, if for me at least, I don't, if I had gotten all that I wanted, if I was like, for example, I wanted to be a pastor and a missionary, I wanted to do tribal church planting in a jungle environment, I wanted a wife that wanted, just loved the Lord and loved me through and through, and raised kids that love the Lord. A lot of things fell apart for various reasons. Doors got slammed in my face over and over, and a lot of nasty stuff from people and from churches, whole churches, that it just kind of kept me thinking something's wrong here. And I didn't
Hmm.
deconstruct quickly over it, but I think if I got all that I'd wanted as a 20-year-old, if you could say, Tim, as a 20-year-old, what was your wish list for the next 40 years? If I'd gotten it all, I might still be stuck. So it's kind of like the nasty stuff I went through actually turned into a good thing, and that it helped me escape. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yes. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. I keep hearing things from my dad back in the day. He would say, I would say it was before he deconstructed himself, but he was on his way. He would say things like Christianity does not transcend the human experience, meaning what you were saying, that this gospel does not change people. I say, like, I have a few Christian friends still that are really great people. You know what? They're really great people in spite of Christianity. So they were already good. Um, usually I have not seen Christians get better because of Christianity. It's because of who they are already. And so, I think I still struggle with reputation and all that, or what I think people are thinking about me, and I have to let go of that. But at the end of the day, or at the end of my life, what I hope people will say is, she is still, even with all the things she went through and the things that she no longer believes that she used to believe, she still loves life. She loves people. She loves the nature around her. She loves music. I still want to make a difference where I'm at. I'm just making the difference without a God. And I feel so much better. I feel, even though I go through so many things, I I just have a sense of calm and peace on me that I never did before. And I remember thinking back in those Christian days, I would have brief moments of peace and calm because I would say what I like to say, a mantra. You'd say something to God and, you know, he's going to make everything better or whatever. But it wasn't an everlasting peace or the peace that passes all understanding that is in the Bible. Now I have it. Now I'm free. And I mean, ironically, the passage is about being free in Christ. you're not free in Christ. You're saying you were a slave to sin. And then Paul says you're a slave to Christ. Okay, where's the freedom in that? There isn't. You're still a slave. And so now being on this side of everything, I feel like I'm truly free. And one of the nights that I stayed with this Christian couple during the divorce, I didn't have a house at the time. And so I was still sharing the house with the ex, but we were on shifts. So I wasn't there one night. And so I stayed with this couple, and they live in the country, and there was no lights around. So I walked outside and I looked up into the sky, all the stars, all the constellations. And that night, I mean, it was kind of a slow process, but that night I looked up in the sky and I said, "You're not there. It's not there. This is it." And I felt good. I wasn't scared. I felt great. So,
Mm,
yeah.
it's an amazing journey. Well, I know we've gone through a lot of your story. I did want to ask, maybe as we start to move towards a wrap up, um, the question of just the trauma that you've gone through. Obviously, we talked in depth about the marriage, but the religious trauma. You mentioned at some point the idea of, you were guilty. God, God is a condemning God who's saying you've fallen short of his glory and that you do
Mhm.
deserve punishment, that you're bad, that he can see inside your head and your thoughts and your heart. Your heart is desperately wicked, and that you're born condemned, and you're always going to be condemned
Mhm.
until that moment where Christ's righteousness covers you, if that happens. But this message of just you're you're bad news just because you even exist. Like
Yeah.
they shove that down your throat. You're bad news because you even exist. You're a problem because you exist. That the psychological damage that that does to us cannot be overstated. And the fact that you can't just deconvert and say, "Oh, I feel good about myself now." The it's like roots that are, if you're pulling them up and you think you got them all, and then you realize there's more, or the layers of the
Right.
onion metaphor. There's another layer down there. When you look at this and you try to reclaim your identity and you try to be finding the joy of just the life, like you just mentioned, living your life and being so joyful at just who you are without a God, what are the roadblocks that you faced that are the reflections of your past religious trauma that you have to really weed through and either talk through yourself or with a friend or a counselor, whatever, get the right book or the right music, but like, well, how do you overcome some of these hurdles that just say you are fine just the way you are? You are safe in your own skin. Nobody's judging you. You're awesome. And your life is yours. So claim it and make it the best of it. Like, how do you get rid of the bad stuff?
Honestly, I don't think that those things are ever going to be truly gone. I think it's going to be a lifelong journey, but I think it just gets better with time. And really, as uh, the when I realized I was done, I did a lot of talking, not only with my dad, but with Rich. He had deconstructed in his 20s, and so um, he had a lot of experience with those same feelings. So we talked it out. I did go to some different counselors, but Rich had told me about so many different people, and I will show you a book because I would say, can you see this okay? Hitchens?
Yeah.
I was definitely hitch slapped.
Mm.
Um, I couldn't get enough of Christopher Hitchens. I would read his articles, his books. I'd go on YouTube, watch old lectures and debates, and then that would lead to other atheists, Seth Andrews, who love his story. Dan Barker, another one, Freedom from Religion Foundation, Sam Harris. I could name so many. So I've read a lot of books. I've watched a lot of YouTubers, lots of, like atheist experience and all that. I even talked to Richard Carrier for a while and told him, hey, I feel so alone being up here in Trumpsville. We really want to find a group, a support group. And so at the time, he knew of an atheist group in Columbus. And so we don't go as much anymore because it's an hour away and it's really hard to get there. But out of that group, I have gained some great friends. And in fact, one of my absolute best friends is the one I mentioned. He's never had an ounce of religion in his life. He's from France. And it's funny because he had nothing and then what I came from. And so he's intrigued by my story. He didn't even know people believe some of the things that we all used to believe. Anyway, a series of reading and watching things and talking with people, and it really helps. And I have my days. I feel I still go through my psychological and mental issues. I have panic attacks every now and then. Um, we still have to deal with the ex a lot, but Rich is my mouthpiece because all my counselors said you are not to talk to him directly. Don't even text him. It's that will just hurt you too much. Just because of all the things that I went through. So Rich is my mouthpiece, and so it's hard for me because my I have 5 kids that go back and forth now between the houses, and so they have to be exposed to Jesus, 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 and there's still a lot of abuse, not a whole lot of love. And they're still in religion, and yet, like I said, he's getting worse and worse. And so that doesn't go away, but I have to learn to deal with it. And
Yeah.
there'll be days that I feel very, very upset, and I wouldn't say empty, but more of a panic. What do I do next? Because I don't pray anymore, and not that it did anything anyway, but what do I have? And so I take a break, I take a deep breath, and usually I either put music on or I go outside to get rid of those thoughts, or I talk to someone. So
Mm.
those things happen, and I realize it will for a while, but I'm still so much happier on this end.
Yeah. What when you look back at your old beliefs, what is one or two of the strangest beliefs, things that you used to think are true or that you used to do?
Oh, there's too many. Well, all the things that I had problems with as a young kid, all those questions, I had a problem with the Garden of Eden and just all the basically immoral things that not just what people did, what was recorded that people did, but what God was purported to do. Um, but yeah, just the belief, oh, the young earth. I did believe that for quite a while. I would not let myself learn too much about evolution. Um, oh, yoga used to be a no-no. I do yoga now. I've been delving into different religions only just to learn about them, but we weren't really supposed to learn about Buddhism and all those different things. And I find it intriguing, and I find that they're all interconnected, which leads me to another book by William Harwood, and he is fantastic. He weaves everything together and how the Bible was formed and how the religions were formed, and it just opened my eyes that it's all mythology, but it's okay to learn about it. And yeah, so
Mm.
I don't know. There's a lot of beliefs that I had that when I look back, I'm kind of embarrassed to think about the fact that I believed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The two that I always keep coming back to as the weirdest ones that I think should have arguably sort of deconverted me a little bit are the circumcision one, not as the cultural practice, but just that God commanded it. Like why didn't He just make boys
Yeah.
away one of them? And then the Lord's table, when you really reflect on that and you think we were pretending to eat a dead
Hmm.
man's body and drink a dead man's
Yeah.
blood, like that's really weird. And like I get it that when everyone around you is doing it, you don't think of it as weird. You just think of it this is just what we do. But that was really a shocker to me that that stuff didn't, upset me when I was in it. But it's a testament to the power of indoctrination.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, my husband is a whole nother story, but he's told me many times that when he was a kid, the story of Abraham taking Isaac up to be sacrificed, and of course he didn't, but he was scared to death as a young boy because his father was a Christian. And he saw that, well, if Abraham was willing to obey God and kill his own son, well, what's to keep from keeping my dad from doing that? And
Mm,
so I had never heard anybody being scared like that before because of that passage. But yeah, that traumatized him. So,
yeah,
yeah,
that's true. That's a good one. Scary,
yeah,
crazy to think about the entire worldview that they have really hinges on child sacrifice. Abraham
yeah,
sacrifices Isaac, Yahweh sacrifices his son Jesus. It's
yep.
it's nuts. Human sacrifice, blood magic, death cult. Well, in terms of just wrapping up, could you give a word of advice to somebody who is maybe in the hardest parts of their journey, where you've obviously done some healing, you've got some space, some distance, some time. Someone that's at the beginning of it, not necessarily in terms of a bad marriage or anything else like that, but just deconstructing their faith and saying, I've seen too much. Maybe it is mythology, maybe it's not, but I can't unsee some of the stuff I've seen. It just seems too weird. And I agree with you all that there's some weird practices. I can't go back. I can't plug back in the matrix. And I know though that as I move forward through this, whether I end up being a progressive Christian or an agnostic or atheist, this is going to be a really hard journey, and I'm probably just getting started. What would you say to someone like
Mm.
that? And I know, aside from the typical, just, you might need a counselor, but apart from counseling, what would you say to someone to either advise them or to give them just a word of encouragement that it's going to be okay and how to get through it?
I would first say you're not alone because there are a lot of people that are going through the same thing, maybe differently, but um, so you're not alone. And also give yourself some space and some time. Realize that you are worth it just because you are here, and you will get through it. And yeah, besides counseling, what I did, just start searching people up on YouTube, or there's support groups even on Facebook, other things like that. There's a ton of books. And find some friends, see if there's anyone out there that is going through some of the same things, because it really helps to talk it out. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Well said. Well said. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up, is there anything else we didn't get to in your story that you wanted to add?
Oh, I don't know. My story is so long. I have notes that I've written from years ago because I want to write a book about my journey of, going through my life and journey out of a marriage and journey out of Christianity. Uh, but yeah, I think that's it. I am writing another book right now. I'm trying to finish it. It's about the composer Ludwig van Beethoven. And it was a book I started when I was still married to the ex. And as a side note, he was jealous of Beethoven because I was spending so much time trying to write this book. And Beethoven died in 1827. So, whatever. Uh, so I've recently picked it back up and I'm trying to finish it. I'm hoping by the end of the summer. I know sometimes when guests are on a show, they have books already, or they've got this, whatever they're doing as a profession. And I am just trying to keep my life together and, grow with my husband and try to raise these kiddos. And I'm still a musician. So, and I write books. But
Never a
yeah,
dull moment.
that's yeah, it's never. I am never bored. That is one thing I never say I have nothing to do. So,
I believe it. I
yeah,
believe it. Well, when the time does come for the deconversion book to come out, definitely please reach out. I'd love to interview you when
definitely.
it's ready to get a copy and read all the details and get maybe just some different questions to go through. But I encourage you to do it. I think it's great if you can, and look forward to that time. Well, thank you so much. I just really appreciate you sharing your story. As always, love getting to know people and hearing people go through it, and obviously the great news that you got out, but also that you have some insights for other people so that they can have hopefully a slightly less bumpy journey, even though it's likely to be bumpy. But just
Oh, yeah.
the knowledge too that it's going to be okay. It's going to be very dark at first, but you'll be okay. So thank you for your
Yes,
encouragement to us on that note.
definitely. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, I'll just wrap up by saying we've been speaking with Dawne Anthony. Dawne, thank you so much. Great to get to know you. Great to hear your story, and let's do it again sometime.
All
Thanks
right.
again.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Have a great day.
Be lost again, but I haven't seen.